The first thing Ambassador Tesseract of the Veth hegemony noticed when the human vessel entered Dock 7 was how ugly it was. Not functionally ugly, not the blunt ugliness of something designed purely for efficiency, but confused ugly, the kind of ugly that suggested the engineers had changed their minds 17 times and never fully committed to any of them. The hull was asymmetric, its port side carrying 3 bulky cylindrical pods that had no obvious purpose. Its rear was disproportionately thick, plated in something matte and dull that absorbed station light instead of reflecting it. Its nose was stubby and flat where every other warship in the galaxy tapered to a confident point. It looked, Tesseract thought, like something built in a hurry by people who had never seen a proper warship in their lives. He was not alone in thinking this. Around him on the observation ring, military delegates from 11 species watched the UES unbroken Meridian dock with expressions that ranged from mild curiosity to open amusement. The Cal-Sarath HFY, a silver carapaced creature with 4 compound eyes, clicked its mandibles in a way that the universal translator rendered as laughter. 2 Veth junior officers exchanged looks. A Drenathi admiral simply turned away, already bored. The Alliance Review had been convened for a simple purpose: to assess each member species' military contribution and assign operational roles in the Joint Defense Treaty. The humans had submitted their warship specifications 3 months in advance, and the numbers had confused the review board. Her listed armament was modest, far below what a vessel her size should theoretically carry. Her speed was unremarkable. Her shielding technology was listed under a classification no other species used, with a note that translation of the technical specifications was pending further review. The review board had assumed this was a bureaucratic delay. Now, looking at the ship herself, several delegates wondered if there had simply been nothing worth translating. Commander Yara Osai stepped off the transit tube and onto the observation ring in a standard-issue gray uniform, her hands clasped behind her back. She was 41 years old with a calm, unhurried face and eyes that didn't perform warmth or aggression. They simply watched. She had been given a seat near the back of the diplomatic row, which she accepted without comment. She stood beside it instead of sitting, looking out at her ship through the dock glass. From across the ring, she could hear the Cal-Sarath translation feed. The primary pods appear decorative. Note the substandard thruster profile. She could not sustain pursuit speed past 40 seconds in a conventional engagement. I confess I expected more from the species that requested full treaty membership. Osai heard it. She did not react. One of her junior officers, Lieutenant Priya Nair, stepped close and lowered her voice. "They're calling her a barge, Commander." "I know," Osai said. "Does it bother you?" Osai looked at the unbroken Meridian. The ship sat in the dock cradle with that same indifference she always carried, patient, squat, absorbing everything and giving nothing back. There were 214 people inside her right now running maintenance cycles. Most of them had served on her for more than 3 years. None of them had ever met a ship they trusted more. "No," Osai said simply, "let them look." The review session began an hour later. Each species delegate presented their vessel's capabilities in a formal briefing. The Veth showcased their Lancer-class cruisers with precision holographics, sleek, beautiful ships with weapon arrays that drew admiring murmurs from the room. The Cal-Sarath showed drone swarm integration technology that made 3 delegates lean forward in their seats. When humanity's turn came, Osai stood at the podium and presented a single slide. It listed the unbroken Meridian's hull designation, year of commission, and crew count. There was a long pause. "Is the technical annex forthcoming?" asked the Veth Review Admiral. "No, sir," Osai said. "That's the full submission." The silence in the room folded into something that was not quite laughter but was not quite respect either. Tesseract made a note in his datapad, assigned to rear support, non-combat role. Osai returned to her seat. She did not look at her ship again that evening. She didn't need to. She already knew what it could do. Chief Engineer Dmitry Vasquez had a habit of talking to the ship. Not metaphorically, not in the loose, affectionate way sailors had always personified their vessels. He talked to the unbroken meridian the way a man talks to a partner who has seen the worst of him and stayed anyway. He narrated his work as he moved through her corridors each morning, commenting on the hum of her power conduits, nodding when the resonance frequency of Deck C ran a half-tone lower than nominal, telling her quietly, under his breath, that he'd have it sorted before lunch. He was doing this now, at 3:40 station time, in the sub-hull maintenance corridor, where the exterior plating interfaced with the adaptive layer beneath. He had a diagnostic pad in one hand and a cold bulb of black coffee in the other, and he was talking to the ship about the review board. "They called you a barge," he said. "Tesseract's junior officer. I pulled the translation log." He pressed a palm flat against the inner hull and felt the faint vibration of her living systems, coolant cycling, micro-servos in the countermeasure arrays running their overnight calibration. "You've been called worse." That was true. In the dockyards of Earth's Luna shipyards 12 years ago, the engineers who designed her had been called worse. They had been called reckless, wasteful, and in one memorable parliamentary hearing, criminally arrogant. The project had nearly been cancelled 4 times. It survived not because of politics but because of memory. Because the people who built her were the survivors of the Warship incursion, and they remembered in their bones what it felt like to fight a war humanity was not equipped to fight. The incursion had lasted 9 years. In the first 2, humanity had lost 60% of its deep space fleet, not because the Warship were faster or smarter, but because they were ruthlessly efficient at finding and exploiting single points of failure. A ship strong in offense but light on hull integrity. They hit the hull. A ship with adaptive shields but rigid weapon arrays. They came from the angle the arrays couldn't track. They studied their enemies, and they dismantled them with surgical patience. And humanity hadn't understood what was happening until the Warship were 6 hours from Earth's orbital ring. What stopped them was not a great battle. What stopped them was time, enough time for a desperate, exhausted species to learn from every ship they'd lost. The Warship had taught humanity, without meaning to, exactly how to be killed. And humanity had taken that lesson and turned it inside out. The unbroken meridian was the result of that education. Those 3 decorative pods on her port side were adaptive countermeasure arrays, ACAs, each one containing a library of several thousand weapon signature profiles. When she was hit by an energy weapon, the ACA nearest the impact point analyzed the frequency, amplitude, and pulse pattern of the strike within 0.3 seconds and recalibrated the hull's reactive layer to resist the next hit from that same weapon by up to 73%. She learned under fire. She got harder to kill the longer a battle lasted. Her hull was a layered composite, outer ablative ceramic, a second layer of carbon-titanium weave, and an innermost membrane of slow-setting regenerative compound that began sealing breach points within minutes of damage. She could take hits that would gut a Veth Lancer and remain combat-capable. The Veth built ships to avoid being hit. Humanity had built a ship that assumed it would be hit, again and again, and planned accordingly. Her primary weapon, the one no one had asked about at the review, because they'd been too busy dismissing the ship to read the classified annex, was a resonance lance. It fired a sustained frequency beam calibrated to the specific hull harmonics of Warship warship architecture. Against any other vessel, it was a competent directed energy weapon. Against Warship construction, it was catastrophic. It found the resonance frequency of their hull lattice and shook it apart from the inside, the way a sustained musical note shatters glass. Vasquez finished his inspection and put his palm on the corridor wall one more time. "They think this is your whole story," he told her. "Let them." The ship hummed, the calibration cycle completed on schedule. Outside, through 3 meters of plating and the cold of space, Dock 7 slept. No one was watching. The joint combat exercises began on the 4th day. They were held in a cleared sector 2 light towers from the station, marked off with telemetry buoys and overseen by a neutral party observation vessel crewed by Drenathi flag officers. The format was straightforward: simulated engagements using attenuated weapon systems, enough power to register on hull sensors and score hits in the simulation database, not enough to cause real damage. Points were assigned for accuracy, maneuverability, coordination, and damage efficiency. The results would inform the Alliance's combat doctrine and operational assignments for the next 5 years. The Veth Lancer cruisers were, by any objective measure, magnificent. Commander Os watched their first drill from the Meridian's bridge with genuine appreciation. There were 6 of them in a coordinated strike formation, long, elegant ships that moved with the kind of effortless precision that only came from deep institutional doctrine and very expensive engineering. They hit their target drones in overlapping salvos, each cruiser covering the firing arc gaps of the others, cycling through attack runs with almost musical rhythm. The Drenathi observers gave them top marks. Tesseract, watching from the observation vessel, wore the satisfied expression of a man who had expected excellence and received it. Then it was humanity's turn. The unbroken Meridian entered the exercise zone alone. Her assigned scenario was a standard defensive engagement: hold position against simulated attacker drones for 12 minutes while minimizing hull damage. Simple. The kind of drill that even a mediocre vessel could pass with competent piloting. What followed confused everyone watching. The Meridian took the first drone salvo without maneuvering to avoid it. She just absorbed it, sitting still as the attenuated blasts registered across her hull. The simulation logged the hits. The Veth officers noted the poor evasion score. Then the second salvo hit, and the third, and somewhere between the fourth and the fifth, something in her hull response began to change. The simulation's own sensors, designed to measure damage accumulation, started returning unusual readings. The hits were registering, but the projected damage curves weren't climbing the way they should have. Something was dampening the effect of each successive strike. Lieutenant Nair watched the Drenathi observer ships from her console. "They're rerunning their sensor calibration," she said. "They think it's an equipment error." "Let them calibrate," Ose said. The Meridian continued absorbing hits. She returned fire intermittently, accurately, methodically, but without the speed or volume that would impress anyone at a distance. Twice, her portside systems flickered on the external feeds, giving the appearance of a minor cascade failure. Both times, Tesseract's observers logged it as malfunction. Both times, the crew inside the ship was doing nothing of the sort. They were allowing the ACA pods to run full-cycle recalibration against the drone weapon signatures, giving them the longest possible data window to build their countermeasure profiles. She looked like a ship struggling to survive a drill. She was, in fact, cataloging an entire fleet's weapons technology. Every attenuated burst from a Veth Lancer's lateral array, fired during a shared exercise pass, had a frequency. Every test pulse from the Calcereth drone escorts had a pulse pattern. Every casual demonstration weapon the Alliance had discharged anywhere near the Meridian in the past 4 days had been logged, measured, and filed. Her ACA library had grown by over 900 new weapon profiles since leaving Earth. She now knew, within acceptable margins, exactly how to weather a direct strike from almost every vessel in the joint fleet. When the drill ended, the Meridian's score was middling, below average for maneuverability, slightly above average for hull endurance, nothing that would change anyone's mind about her. In the post-exercise review, Tesseract's senior tactical officer summed up the human vessel in 2 sentences: adequate endurance profile, recommend rear support assignment, non-combat classification, logistics corridor duty. Osai signed the review acknowledgement without comment. In the engine room, Vasquez pulled up the ACA catalog and scrolled through it slowly. 943 profiles. Clean data on the Veth Lancer's close-range burst array. Full frequency map of the Cal-Sarath drone network. Even a partial signature on the Drenathi observer vessel's passive defense grid, purely incidental, from a routine scan. He set the pad down and went back to talking to the ship. They gave us a homework assignment, he said, and we did it. Intelligence packet arrived on the 7th day, routed through 3 relay stations and flagged with a priority classification so high that the station's automated system held it in quarantine for 40 minutes before a human signals officer manually cleared it and brought it to Commander Osai at 600 hours. She read it in her quarters, still holding the bulb of tea she'd made 30 seconds before the knock on her door, and when she was finished, she set the tea down and read it again. Then she contacted Tesseract. The Veth Admiral received her in his command suite, a broad, high-ceilinged room decorated with geometric tapestries in his species honor pattern. He was dressed for a formal morning briefing, a long robe in hegemony blue, a rank medallion at his collar. He looked at Osai with the particular expression of a senior official who has learned to give junior officials the appearance of their full attention while already composing the reply that will end the meeting. "Commander," he said, "you've reviewed the packet." "Yes." She put her datapad on his desk, the intelligence summary already open. "The Korshai have moved a hunter-killer armada into Passage 7. Current trajectory puts them at this station in approximately 71 hours. This isn't a probe, the fleet composition indicates a deliberate assault. They've broken the ceasefire." Tesseract studied the datapad for a moment. His expression did not change significantly, but something around his secondary eyes, the smaller pair, below and inside the primary, contracted slightly in a way that Osai had learned meant skepticism. "Your intelligence source," he said. "This is a human monitoring station. One station. Cross-referenced with 2 beacon relay anomalies and a gravitational shadow reading from the Passage 7 entry point. The data is consistent." "It is one reading," Tesseract said carefully, suggesting a threat of enormous magnitude arriving at a remarkably convenient time during a joint military review when all Alliance assets are concentrated in one location. He set the datapad down with the deliberate gentleness of a man putting away an object of no particular value. "You understand why I must treat this with caution." Osai looked at him steadily. She was 30 centimeters shorter than Tesseract and standing in a room that belonged to him, in a station where every tactical decision ultimately required his signature. She was aware of all of this. "I understand," she said. "I'm asking you to permit the unbroken meridian to move to the Passage 7 perimeter as a precautionary measure. If nothing comes, nothing is lost. If the intelligence is correct." "If the intelligence is correct," Tesseract interrupted, not unkindly, "then the correct response is a coordinated alliance posture, not a single vessel and not the vessel I would choose for a forward engagement." He picked up his own pad and made a notation. "I'll convene a tactical committee review for this afternoon. The data will be properly assessed. In the meantime, I'm asking you to maintain your current station assignment." A pause. "Rear support. Logistics corridor." Osai stood still for 3 seconds. She recognized what was happening, had seen the shape of it clearly enough in the flat light of her quarters before she'd even come here. She was being handled. "Understood," she said. "Thank you for your time, Admiral." She left. In the corridor outside, Nair was waiting. "Well," Nair asked. "Afternoon committee review," Osai said. She walked without slowing. "Which means a decision by 2,000 hours at the earliest, assuming they don't table it for further assessment. 71 hours minus 14 is 57. That's how long we may actually have." She stopped at a junction and looked back toward the dock windows. The meridian was visible from here, distant and small against the station structure, ungainly and dark. "Get the crew back aboard. Full systems warm-up, quiet. No broadcast signatures. That'll show on station sensors. It'll show as a maintenance cycle. Let it." Osai turned away from the window. Tell Vasquez I want the resonance lance at 60% charge readiness, not armed 60%. He'll understand the difference. Nair hesitated. Commander, if you're wrong about this. I know, Osai kept walking. But I was born on a planet the Korshai tried to sterilize. I know what their fleet movements look like when they're not planning to stop. Korshai did not wait 71 hours. They arrived in 53, dropping out of transit space in a cascade of displacement signatures that lit up every sensor array within 4 light towers of the station simultaneously. The Alliance Tactical Committee had been in its second session for about 20 minutes when the alarm started. By the time Tesseract reached his command ship, the Korshai Vanguard had already reached engagement range with the outer buoy line, and the weapons they were using were not in any Alliance threat database. The first Veth Lancer to take direct fire simply stopped transmitting. No distress signal, no crew broadcast. One moment it was there on the tactical display, the next moment it was a debris field expanding at 12 kilometers per second. Whatever the Korshai had developed since the ceasefire, it was not the slow, methodical weaponry they'd used in the incursion. This was something faster, something that hit without the half-second warning of a traditional energy bloom. The Veth tactical AI hadn't even generated an evasion recommendation before the ship was gone. Chaos arrived in the command channels almost immediately. Osai stood on her bridge and listened to it without moving. Around her, her crew was at full stations. They had been at full stations for 6 hours, ever since the warm-up cycle she'd ordered the morning after Tesseract's dismissal. The Meridian was ready. Her ACA arrays were calibrated to over 900 profiles. Her hull systems were at full composite integrity. Her resonance lance was at 60% charge, 80 seconds from full combat readiness, not the 12 minutes it would take from cold start. She had prepared for this the only way she knew how, quietly, completely, without asking permission. The tactical feed was fractured. 3 Veth Lancer signals had gone dark in the first 4 minutes. The Cal-Sereth drone net, so impressive in the exercises, was fighting to establish target locks against Korshai electronic countermeasures that their systems had never encountered. Tesseract's flagship, the Eternal Proof, had taken a partial hit on its starboard array and was broadcasting a controlled damage report that Osai's comms officer translated as significantly worse than the official language suggested. The rear support assignment order still sat in her operational log, uncancelled. Nair looked across the bridge. Commander, we're still on logistics corridor duty. Her voice was entirely neutral. She was not arguing. She was asking. Osai looked at the tactical display. The Korshai fleet was moving in a pattern she recognized from the incursion archives, a spreading envelopment, designed to cut off retreat corridors and force a static defense. It was the same formation they'd used at the Battle of Kepler Station, the one that had taken 4 Terran destroyers and a colony transport, and left nothing but wreckage and a lesson that humanity had spent 9 years paying for. She had studied that battle in the academy. She had walked through the debris field herself, on a survey mission when she was 26, and stood in what was left of the command module of the TCS Halcyon and understood, in a way that no briefing document could teach, what it meant to be unprepared. She had spent the last 11 years making sure she never stood in wreckage again. Battle station, she said. Her voice was the same temperature it always was. Helm, take us forward. Navigation, I want an intercept trajectory for the Korshai lead element, arc us around the Eternal Proof's position. I want to draw their fire before they get a second shot at the flagship. She paused, and then she said the thing she'd waited years to be in the right position to say. Remember why she was built. 214 people on the unbroken Meridian heard that. Every one of them knew exactly what it meant. They had trained for this. They had drilled for this, run simulations in the dead hours of the ship's night, argued about firing solutions over cold meals and argued about them again. And somewhere in those years they had stopped being afraid of the Korshai and started being something else instead. The Meridian moved forward. In the dock behind her, the logistics corridor sat empty. Ahead, the battle and the people who had laughed at her ship needed what only she could provide. She went to meet it without hesitation, without performance, without fear. The way she had always been built to go. The first time a HFY weapon hit the unbroken Meridian, the entire ship shuddered. Not metaphorically, not as a figure of speech for dramatic damage reports. The hull literally vibrated, a deep, subsonic resonance that Vasquez felt in his back teeth from his post in the engineering bay, that rattled the coffee bulbs in their clamps, that made one of the newer crew members on Deck 3 momentarily lose his grip on a console rail. The HFY new generation strike weapon hit at a frequency that had been specifically engineered. It became immediately clear to interfere with conventional ablative plating. Against any ship in the Alliance fleet, that first hit would have been catastrophic. Against the Meridian, it was data. ACA Pod 1 registered the impact within 0.3 seconds. It analyzed the weapon signature, frequency, duration, amplitude, pulse modulation, and began computing the optimal reactive layer response. By the time the second hit came, 12 seconds later, the hull's outermost ceramic layer had shifted its absorption coefficient by 11%, tuning itself to the specific wavelength of the weapon that had just struck it. The second hit registered 20% less effective hull penetration than the first. The third hit, 34% less. Each successive strike was measurably less damaging than the one before. On the HFY command vessel, their tactical analysts noted this with what would later be reconstructed, from recovered battle logs, as considerable alarm. On the Meridian's bridge, Osai watched the ACA efficiency readout and said nothing. She had spent enough time with this ship to know when to speak and when to let her work. The battle around them was not going well for the Alliance. The Veth Lancer formation had fractured under the HFY envelopment. 3 ships confirmed destroyed, 2 more pulling back with critical system damage. The Cal-Sereth drone net had achieved partial target lock on the HFY wing elements and was scoring hits, but the HFY were adapting faster than the drone AI could retarget. Tesseract's eternal proof was holding, but barely. She was stationary, directing tactical coordination, and her starboard array was offline. The Meridian had drawn the attention of 2 HFY attack cruisers. This was, as far as Osai was concerned, exactly right. Every weapon they fired at her was a weapon not fired at the eternal proof. Every second those cruisers spent targeting her was a second the Alliance fleet could use to reorganize. She had positioned the Meridian as bait deliberately, not because she was expendable, but because she was the only ship present that could be bait and survive it. She took 17 direct hits in the first 8 minutes of engagement. By the 14th hit, the ACA adaptation had reduced effective hull damage per strike by 61%. By the 17th, the outer plating was registering HFY energy impacts with something that the damage system's own diagnostic logs would later describe, in its mechanically literal way, as within nominal operational tolerance. The ship was not undamaged. 3 sections of Deck 5 had lost pressurization, 2 crew members had been sent to medical with impact injuries, and one of the secondary coolant loops had burst from the vibration stress. But she was fighting. She was still there. And now it was her turn. Resonance lance at full charge, Vasquez reported from engineering. His voice was steady. In 12 years, Os had never heard him sound anything other than steady. Target lock available on the lead HFY cruiser. Recommend full-cycle discharge. I can give you 3 consecutive shots before the capacitors need a 60-second recharge. Nair targeting. Locked, Nair said. Hull frequency match confirmed. They're running standard HFY lattice construction, same as the war. No upgrades to the structural resonance profile. Osai found this interesting in a cold, distant way. The HFY had upgraded their weapons in the years since the ceasefire. They had not upgraded their hulls. They had not believed anyone knew their weakness. They had not believed that a species they had nearly exterminated would remember, with perfect precision, exactly where to hit them. That was their mistake. "Fire," said Osai. The resonance lance made no sound in space, of course. But inside the meridian, every crew member felt the discharge as a bone-deep vibration that ran from the keel upward. A sustained hum, lower than the ship's normal operational note, that lasted for 4 full seconds and left a silence afterward that felt almost physical. On the tactical display, the lead Warship cruiser's hull integrity reading, broadcast on the shared Alliance tactical net, pulled live from the enemy vessel's own emergency transponder, dropped from 94% to 31% in the time it took Osai to draw a breath. Then the secondary resonance cascade hit its structural lattice, and the number disappeared entirely, replaced by a spreading field of debris signatures that the tactical AI cataloged with bureaucratic calm as target neutralized. The second Warship attack cruiser broke off its attack run immediately. This was not cowardice. It was correct tactical behavior, a recognition that something had changed in the engagement parameters, and that maintaining course meant accepting a firing solution that had just proven lethal. But breaking off meant turning, and turning meant exposure of its aft sections, and Nair had already shifted targeting to the new angle before the Warship helm had completed 15 degrees of turn. The second shot hit the cruiser in its engine cluster. The resonance frequency wasn't optimized for the aft section. The lattice was slightly different there, reinforced for thrust load, but it was close enough. The Warship ship's propulsion system failed catastrophically. It drifted, spinning slowly, broadcasting distress signals in a language that the Alliance translation network rendered with eerie precision, hull integrity failing, requesting emergency extraction. No extraction came. For approximately 40 seconds, the broader battle paused in the way that battles sometimes do, not from any formal ceasefire, but from the specific cognitive shock of watching something that was not supposed to be possible happen in real time. Every vessel in the engagement zone, Alliance and Warship alike, had watched a midline support ship that had spent the last week being quietly dismissed take 2 enemy cruisers out of the fight in under a minute. The Warship tactical net, partially intercepted by the Meridian Signals team, showed a rapid recalculation of threat assessments. The human vessel, which had been classified as a tertiary distraction target in the Warship battle plan, was suddenly the primary threat designation for the entire armada. The Warship Supreme Commander redirected 6 vessels toward the Meridian. Osai did not flinch. Vasquez. Lance recharging, 42 seconds. A pause. 6 inbound, Commander. That's a lot of fire for 42 seconds. I know. ACA status. All 3 pods active, adaptation curve still climbing. We've cataloged their new weapon signature. We're at 41% resistance on the first-gen strikes, building. The new weapon is slower to profile because we haven't seen it enough times yet. Another pause, and she could hear in the slight compression of his voice the thing he wasn't quite saying. We need to take more hits to learn it faster. Understood, Osai said. Helm, hold course. What followed was 19 seconds of the most concentrated weapons fire the unbroken Meridian had ever absorbed. 6 Warship warships, no longer treating her as a nuisance, fired with everything they had in coordinated overlapping salvos designed to overwhelm any conventional hull. Sections of the Meridian went dark. Deck 2 lost atmosphere. The primary coolant manifold ruptured, and Vasquez ran through the smoke of it to seal the secondary bypass manually, because the automated system had lost power. 3 crew members died in those 19 seconds, not from weapons impact but from secondary fires and the explosive decompression of a corridor that had taken 3 successive direct hits in the same 12-meter span. The ship did not stop. She kept adapting, kept cataloging, kept building her resistance profile with every hit. And when the Lance recharged at the 42-second mark, she was still there, damaged, venting plasma from two hull sections, running on 63% power but still there, still targeting, still fighting. The third shot hit the HFY flagship at hull frequency resonance so precisely matched that the vessel's own structural supports amplified the effect. The flagship came apart in 4 seconds. Not an explosion, a disintegration. The HFY command network went silent. Without their command signal, the Armada's formation collapsed. Ships that had been in coordinated assault patterns suddenly had no one to coordinate with. 2 HFY vessels attempted retreat and were picked off by the regrouping VETH formation. 3 others fired sporadically and without direction before cutting their engines and going dark, the HFY equivalent of a white flag. The remaining ships scattered. The battle lasted 11 more minutes, then it was over. The unbroken Meridian stayed at the center of the debris field, running damage checks and casualty reports, her hull still venting thin wisps of condensation into the vacuum, evidence of the fires that her internal systems were already methodically suppressing. She was scarred and battered and short 3 people who were never coming home. She was still there. She was always going to still be there. That was the whole point of her. They brought the unbroken Meridian back to Dock 7 on low thrust, one engine dark, hull sensors still logging the last of the microfractures as the reactive layer finished its post-battle sealing cycle. She moved slowly through the approach corridor, and the dock crews who had been assigned to guide her in, who had been here a week ago when she arrived and been part of the quiet institutional laughter, stood at their stations and said nothing. There was nothing to say that the ship's condition didn't already say better. The observation ring was not empty this time. Every delegation that had been present for the review was there. The Calcereth attaché with the compound eyes that had clicked in laughter, the Drenathi admiral who had turned away bored, Veth officers whose Lancer-class cruisers, the beautiful, elegant ones, were now being catalogued in the salvage assessment reports filtering through the station network. They stood in silence and watched the human warship come home. She looked worse than when she had arrived. Much worse. Her portside ACA pods were scorched, one of them partially retracted in a way that suggested the housing mechanism had taken damage and hadn't fully recovered. 3 hull sections showed the dark, irregular patterning of the regenerative compound mid-cure, still working, still sealing hours after the last hit. Her nose section, the stubby flat nose that everyone had noticed on arrival day, carried a long asymmetric scar where 3 HFY strikes had landed in near-identical positions, and the hull had just barely held. The scar ran from the upper port edge to the sensor cluster, and it was not going to be easy to repair. She was, by any conventional aesthetic measure, even uglier than before. Commander Osai came down the transit tube alone, ahead of her crew, and crossed the dock floor in the same unhurried way she always moved. She had changed into a clean uniform but hadn't slept. There was a small sealed cut above her left temple where she'd caught the edge of a console during one of the larger impacts, treated, taped over, not serious. She carried nothing in her hands. Her face had the particular quality that comes after extreme stress has fully passed, and the body has simply run out of adrenaline to produce. Not tired exactly, but stripped down to the essential self, every non-necessary expression removed. Admiral Tesseract was waiting for her at the dock floor. He was not in his formal morning robe. He was in his command uniform, which Osa had not yet seen him wear, and it had the insignia of his full rank displayed, something reserved, she understood from a briefing she'd read, for occasions of significant formal weight. He stood alone. No aides, no junior officers at his back. They faced each other for a moment. Around them, the dock was quiet in the way that spaces become quiet when many people are all holding the same breath. Tesseract's secondary eyes contracted, not in skepticism this time, but in the expression the universal translator had flagged in her pre-mission cultural briefing as formal acknowledgement of debt. He was tall, and his species posture conventions meant that standing level rather than angled slightly upward was itself a gesture of considerable significance. He was standing level. "How many of her systems," he said slowly, carefully, in accented standard, "are we not meant to see?" I considered this for just a moment, not performing consideration, but actually thinking about how to answer a question that had more layers to it than the asking revealed. Then she said, "All of them." Tesseract was quiet for 3 seconds. "I denied your forward engagement request," he said. It was not quite an apology. It was the Veth equivalent of a direct nomming of the error without softening. "You made the decision your information supported," Osai said. "It's what commanders do." Another silence. Then 3 of your crew did not return. "No," Osai said, "they didn't." She did not say anything more about that. There was nothing more to say in a dock bay with observers. There would be time, later, in the ship's small memorial space, a converted storage compartment on Deck 4 that had been repurposed during the incursion when people needed somewhere to go, to say the rest. Tesseract inclined his head, a formal gesture from his culture of precisely the weight his uniform insignia demanded. "The Alliance owes the unbroken meridian an accounting," he said, "and her commander." I looked past him at her ship. The dock lights were warm against the hull, and in this light the regenerative compound still working its way across the scars looked almost silver. The ship healing herself, even now, quiet and methodical, doing what she was built to do without requiring anyone to watch. I thought about Vasquez, who was probably already back in the sub-hull corridors, talking to her. She thought about Nair, who had held targeting lock through 17 direct hits without a single error and had not mentioned it once in the after-action report. She thought about the 3 empty berths on Deck 3 and what it would mean to write 3 letters home. "We were just doing our job," Commander Osai said. She turned and walked back toward the ship. Behind her, no one laughed. Nobody was ever going to laugh at Dock 7 again. The unbroken meridian sat in her cradle, scarred and dark and slowly healing, and the dock bay held the silence of people who had learned, at some cost, the difference between what looks dangerous and what truly is. Some lessons only come the hard way. But they always come.